The autumn sun filtered through the grimy windows of Morrison's auto repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Thomas Morrison stood beneath the hood of an old Honda Civic, his weathered hands moving with the careful precision of someone who'd spent 40 years understanding engines. His gray hair, streaked with remnants of dark brown, fell across his forehead as he worked. The deep lines around his eyes told stories of late nights and early mornings, of raising a daughter alone after his wife Sarah passed 7 years ago. At 58, Thomas had the kind of face that made people trust him immediately. There was something in his gentle expression, in the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, that spoke of a man who'd known both joy and sorrow and had chosen kindness anyway. His coveralls, faded gray with his name stitched above the pocket, hung loosely on his lean frame. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson's car is ready," called his daughter Emma from the small office at the front of the shop. She was 26 now, with her mother's blonde hair and his own hazel eyes. Watching her manage the business side of the shop filled Thomas with a quiet pride that sometimes caught in his throat. "Thanks, sweetheart," he replied, straightening up and wiping his hands on an old rag. His back ached in that familiar way it had started to these past few years, a reminder that time moved forward whether you were ready or not. It was just past 4 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon when the sleek black Porsche pulled into the lot outside. Through the window, Thomas could see a man in an expensive charcoal suit stepping out, his phone pressed to his ear. He was younger, maybe mid-40s, with perfectly styled dark hair and the kind of confident posture that came from never having to wonder if you could afford something. This was Richard Sterling, though Thomas didn't know it yet. Richard was the CEO of Sterling Tech Solutions, a company that had made him millions developing software for automotive manufacturers. He stood beside his Porsche, gesturing impatiently as he spoke into his phone, his Italian leather shoes reflecting the afternoon light. Thomas watched as a young woman emerged from the passenger side. She wore a simple navy t-shirt and jeans, her long brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. There was something uncertain in the way she glanced between the shop and the man on the phone, as if she wasn't quite sure she belonged in either place. The Porsche's hood was up, a thin wisp of steam rising from the engine. Richard ended his call with an irritated swipe of his finger, and looked around the lot with the expression of someone who'd found himself somewhere beneath his station. Thomas walked outside, the October breeze cool against his face. "Afternoon," he said in his calm, measured way. "Looks like you might have overheated." Richard barely glanced at him. "Obviously. I need this fixed immediately. I have a dinner meeting at 7. "Let me take a look," Thomas said, already moving toward the engine. Years of working with the public had taught him that some people's rudeness came from stress, not malice. He'd learned to let it slide off him like water off waxed paint. As Thomas examined the Porsche's cooling system, another car pulled into the lot, a battered blue Toyota with a cracked windshield and a muffler that announced its arrival from a block away. The man who climbed out looked to be in his early 30s, wearing work boots and jeans stained with what looked like paint or drywall dust. His name was Marcus Webb, and he had the tired eyes of someone working 2 jobs to make ends meet. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus called out, his voice carrying a note of apology. "I know I don't have an appointment, but my car's making this sound and I'm worried it won't make it through the weekend. My daughter's got a soccer tournament on Saturday, and I promised her I'd be there." Thomas looked up from the Porsche and smiled. There was something about Marcus that reminded him of himself 20 years ago, when Emma was young and every unexpected repair bill felt like a small crisis. "Let's hear what she sounds like," he said, starting to walk toward the Toyota. "Excuse me." Richard's voice cut across the lot, sharp with disbelief. "You're going to work on that heat before my car?" Thomas paused, turning back with that same patient expression. "Sir, I need to order a part for your Porsche. The water pump's failing. It'll take about 30 minutes for the part to arrive. In the meantime, I can diagnose this gentleman's issue." Richard's laugh was short and humorless. "You've got to be kidding me. Do you have any idea what my time is worth?" The young woman who'd been with Richard stepped forward then, her voice quiet but firm. "Richard, he's trying to help everyone." "Stay out of this, Jennifer," Richard said, not even looking at her. Then, turning back to Thomas, he continued, "I'm willing to pay double your rate if you prioritize my vehicle." Thomas felt something tighten in his chest, but his voice remained steady. I appreciate the offer, sir, but I help folks in the order they arrive, unless it's an emergency. Your car's safe to sit for 30 minutes. This gentleman might not have that luxury. Richard's face flushed red. He looked from Thomas to Marcus's rusty Toyota and back again. You're actually choosing that disaster on wheels over a $70,000 Porsche? What kind of businessman are you? The kind who sleeps at night, Thomas replied softly. Richard pointed at Marcus, his voice dripping with contempt. Look at him. Look at that car. He's probably going to pay you in pocket change. Meanwhile, you're making me wait like I'm nobody. Marcus's face had gone pale, his jaw clenched tight. Thomas could see the younger man's hands forming fists at his sides, could see the shame and anger warring in his expression. That's enough, Thomas said, and though his voice didn't rise, there was steel beneath the gentleness. That man is my customer, same as you. Same as anyone who walks through that door. Richard shook his head, a cruel smile playing at his lips. This is exactly what's wrong with small businesses. No vision, no sense of priorities. You'll be working on broken-down jalopies in this sad little garage for the rest of your life, and you'll never understand why you stayed small. He pulled out his phone again, already dialing. Jennifer, get the car towed to the dealership. I'm not wasting another minute in this place. As Richard made his call, Thomas turned to Marcus. Come on, he said quietly. Let's see what's going on with your car. They walked to the Toyota together, and Thomas could feel the younger man's embarrassment radiating like heat. I'm sorry about that, Marcus said, his voice rough. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't cause anything, Thomas assured him. Now let's hear that sound you mentioned. Marcus started the engine, and immediately there was a grinding noise from somewhere deep in the transmission. Thomas listened with his head cocked, his experienced ears tracing the problem to its source. Behind them, a tow truck was already pulling into the lot for the Porsche. You've got a bearing going bad, Thomas said after a moment. It's not critical yet, but it will be soon. I can fix it for you today, but I'll be honest with you, parts and labor will run about $400. Marcus's face fell. He looked down at his boots, and Thomas saw him swallow hard. I've got $200 in my account right now. I get paid again next Friday. Could I possibly give you the $200 now and the rest in installments? Thomas studied the younger man for a long moment. He saw the pride warring with necessity in Marcus's eyes, saw the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of trying to keep everything together. He thought of all the times someone had shown him kindness when Emma was small, when unexpected generosity had meant the difference between making it through the month and falling behind. Tell you what, Thomas said. Give me $100 now. Bring the rest when you can. Mr. Morrison, I can't. You can and you will, Thomas interrupted gently. Your daughter's counting on you to be at that tournament. Let's make sure you can get there. Marcus's eyes grew bright, and he looked away quickly, blinking. Thank you, he managed. I don't know what to say. Don't need to say anything, Thomas replied. Just pass it forward someday when you can. As Marcus pulled his wallet from his pocket, carefully counting out 5 $20 bills, Jennifer approached them. She'd been standing apart from Richard, watching the whole exchange with an expression Thomas couldn't quite read. Excuse me, she said, her voice soft but determined. I'm Jennifer Hartley. I work with Mr. Sterling, but I want you to know that his behavior was completely unacceptable. The way he spoke to both of you was wrong. Thomas nodded, appreciating her courage in saying so. People have bad days, he said simply. It's more than a bad day with him, Jennifer said, and there was something sad in her eyes. But what you did just now, helping this gentleman, treating everyone with respect, that meant something. She glanced back at Richard, who was arguing with the tow truck driver about something, his voice carrying across the parking lot in irritated bursts. I should go, she said. But thank you for the reminder that decent people still exist. The tow truck left with the Porsche, and Richard left in a taxi, his parting glare toward Thomas full of disdain. Thomas simply waved and went back to work, with Emma helping Marcus with the paperwork while Thomas got started on the Toyota. The sun was setting by the time Thomas finished the repair, the sky painted in shades of orange and deep purple. Marcus shook his hand firmly, his gratitude evident in every word of thanks. "I won't forget this, Mr. Morrison. I promise you that." That night, as Thomas and Emma closed up the shop, she put her hand on his arm. "You know that guy could have paid full price for Marcus's repair and never missed the money," she said. "I know," Thomas replied, locking the front door. "But that's not why we do this work." "Why do we do it, Dad?" Emma asked, though Thomas suspected she already knew the answer. "Because fixing cars is about more than engines and transmissions," he said, the way he'd said many times before. "It's about keeping people moving through their lives. It's about being part of a community. Your mother understood that. She used to say that we're all just trying to get where we need to go, and sometimes we need a little help along the way." Emma smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder the way she had when she was small. "I miss her," she said. "Me too, sweetheart," Thomas replied, his voice soft in the gathering darkness. "Every single day." The next morning dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect autumn days that made Thomas grateful to be alive. He was at the shop by 7, the way he had been for 40 years, the coffee brewing in the small office while he reviewed the day's work orders. At 9 o'clock, a bright red Ferrari pulled into the lot, its engine purring with the kind of mechanical perfection that made Thomas's heart beat a little faster. Behind the wheel was a woman in her early 60s, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob, wearing a crisp white blouse and sunglasses that probably cost more than some of the cars in his lot. She stepped out with the grace of someone comfortable in her own skin, her smile warm and genuine as Thomas approached. "Good morning," she said. "Are you Thomas Morrison?" "I am," he replied, wondering what had brought a Ferrari to his modest shop. "My name is Catherine Sterling," she said, extending her hand. "I believe you met my son Richard yesterday." Thomas's heart sank slightly, but he shook her hand anyway. Her grip was firm, her skin soft, but her handshake that of someone who'd worked for what she had. "Yes, ma'am, I did." "I want to apologize for his behavior," Catherine said immediately. "I raised him better than that, though you wouldn't know it from how he acted. I heard about what happened from Jennifer Hartley. She's my executive assistant, and she was quite disturbed by the whole incident." "There's no need for you to apologize," Thomas said. "We all have our moments." Catherine smiled at that, but there was sadness in it. "That's very kind of you, but Richard's moments have been happening more and more frequently. Success has changed him, and not for the better. He's forgotten where he came from, forgotten the values his father and I tried to instill in him." She glanced back at the Ferrari, then at the shop, taking in the old building with its peeling paint and hand-painted sign. "My husband started with a small garage much like this one," she said. "We built Sterling Tech from nothing, from long nights and hard work and treating people right. Richard inherited the success but not the struggle. He doesn't understand that respect isn't about what car you drive or how much money you have." Thomas nodded, understanding more than she probably knew. "It's easy to forget lessons we haven't had to learn the hard way," he said. "That's very gracious," Catherine replied. "But I didn't come here just to apologize. I came because Jennifer told me what you did for that young man, Marcus. How you helped him despite Richard's rudeness, how you gave him credit when he needed it. That's the kind of integrity that's rare these days." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "I'm looking for someone to manage the service department for our new automotive division. We're developing software that integrates with vehicle systems, and we need someone who actually understands cars and the people who drive them. Someone with real experience and real values." Thomas took the card, surprised. "Mrs. Sterling, I appreciate the offer, but I've got my shop here, my daughter. The position would pay $180,000 a year," Catherine continued. "Full benefits, stock options, and you'd have the authority to build the department your way. We need someone who can bridge the gap between the technology we're creating and the reality of what people need from their vehicles." The number hung in the air between them. It was more than Thomas had made in the best 3 years of his business combined. It was security for Emma, for himself, for a future he'd stopped letting himself imagine. "I can see I've surprised you," Catherine said gently. You don't have to answer now. Think about it. Talk it over with your daughter. But I want you to know that this offer is genuine. Jennifer spoke very highly of you, and in my experience, people who show character in small moments show it in large ones too. She started to turn back to her car, then paused. You know, my husband used to say that the measure of a man isn't in how he treats people who can do things for him, but in how he treats people who can do nothing for him at all. You treated Marcus with dignity when my son treated him with contempt. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. After Catherine left, Thomas stood in the parking lot for a long time, the business card in his hand, his mind spinning. Emma found him there 15 minutes later, still staring at nothing in particular. Dad? You okay? He handed her the card and told her everything. Emma's eyes grew wide as she listened, her hand coming up to cover her mouth when he mentioned the salary. Oh my God, Dad, she whispered. That's life-changing money. I know, he said quietly. You have to take it, Emma said firmly. You've worked so hard for so long, and you deserve this. You deserve security and rest and not having to worry about every little expense. Thomas looked at his daughter, at the shop behind her, at the neighborhood he'd been part of for 4 decades. But what about this place? What about all the people who depend on us? Emma took his hands in hers, and he was struck by how much she looked like her mother in that moment. Dad, you've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. You took care of Mom when she was sick, you raised me, you've helped half the neighborhood keep their cars running when they couldn't afford to go anywhere else. Maybe it's time to let someone take care of you for a change. What about you? He asked. What about the business? I'll figure it out, Emma said. Maybe I'll sell it. Maybe I'll hire another mechanic, maybe I'll do something completely different. But Dad, you can't turn this down because you're worried about me. I'm 26 years old. It's time for both of us to start new chapters. That evening, Thomas sat in the small house he'd shared with Sarah, then with Emma, and now inhabited alone most nights since Emma had moved into her own apartment. The furniture was old but comfortable, the walls covered with photos spanning decades. Sarah smiling on their wedding day, her dark hair swept up in an elegant twist, her eyes full of joy and promise. Emma as a baby, as a toddler, graduating high school, graduating college. His parents, long gone now, standing in front of the shop when it first opened. He thought about Marcus and his daughter's soccer tournament. He thought about Richard Sterling and his contempt. He thought about Catherine's words about integrity and character. He thought about Sarah and what she would say if she were here. She'd tell him to take the job, he knew. She'd tell him that helping people didn't have to mean martyring himself, that accepting good fortune when it came wasn't the same as abandoning his principles. She'd remind him, as she had so many times when she was alive, that he couldn't pour from an empty cup. Thomas picked up his phone and dialed the number on Catherine's card. She answered on the second ring. Thomas, she said warmly, as if she'd been expecting his call. Mrs. Sterling, he began, his voice steady despite the nervousness he felt. I've thought about your offer. I've talked with my daughter. If the position is still available, I'd be honored to accept it. There was a pause, and then Catherine's voice came through, rich with genuine pleasure. Thomas, you've just made my day. When can you start? They worked out the details over the next hour. Thomas would give himself 6 weeks to transition the shop, to either sell it or set Emma up with another mechanic who could run it in his stead. Catherine was more than understanding, telling him that his consideration for his existing customers only confirmed that she'd made the right choice. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Thomas trained Emma on the more complex repairs he'd always handled himself. They interviewed mechanics, finally finding a man named David Chin who'd recently moved to the area. David was in his 40s, experienced and skilled, with a gentle manner that reminded Thomas of himself. The three of them worked out an arrangement where David would lease the business from Emma, with an option to buy in a few years if things worked out. Telling the regular customers was harder than Thomas had expected. Mrs. Patterson cried, hugging him tight and telling him he'd kept her late husband's car running for 15 years after he passed. Mr. Rodriguez, who'd been bringing his work trucks to Thomas since the shop opened, shook his hand solemnly, and made Thomas promise to stay in touch. There were dozens of them, people whose lives had intersected with his through the simple act of keeping their vehicles running, and saying goodbye to each one felt like closing a chapter of his life he'd never get back. Marcus came by 2 weeks before Thomas's last day, the rest of the money for his repair in hand. His car was running smoothly, and his daughter's soccer team had won their tournament. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "I heard you're leaving. I wanted to make sure I caught you before you went." "I'm glad you did," Thomas replied, taking the money and writing Marcus a receipt. "I also wanted to tell you something," Marcus continued. "That day you helped me, when you gave me credit and treated me with respect even though that other guy was being so awful, it meant more to me than you know. I was at a really low point, feeling like I couldn't catch a break, like I was failing my daughter. Your kindness reminded me that there are still good people in the world, and it gave me the strength to keep pushing through." He pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it to Thomas. "I'm not much of a writer, but I wanted you to have this. It's a thank you letter. I know you're going on to bigger things, and I'm happy for you, but I wanted you to know that what you do here, the way you treat people, it matters. It really, truly matters." Thomas read the letter later that night, alone in his quiet house, and he had to set it down twice because his vision blurred with tears. Marcus had written about teaching his daughter that success wasn't measured in money or status but in the kindness you showed to others. He'd written about using Thomas as an example of the kind of person he wanted to be, the kind of father he wanted his daughter to see. On Thomas's last day at the shop, Emma threw a small gathering. The lot filled with familiar faces, people bringing potluck dishes and sharing stories about Thomas and the shop. Mrs. Patterson brought her famous chocolate cake. Mr. Rodriguez showed up with tamales his wife had made. Even David Chin, who'd only known Thomas for a few weeks, gave a short speech about what an honor it was to carry on the legacy of Morrison's auto repair. Emma spoke last, her voice wavering but strong. "My dad taught me that work is about more than making money," she said. "It's about showing up for people, about being reliable and honest and kind, even when it's not easy. He taught me that by example, every single day, especially in the years after we lost my mom. He could have given up, could have let grief overwhelm him, but instead he chose to keep serving this community with the same care and dedication he'd always shown. I'm proud to be his daughter, and I know that whatever he does next, he'll do it with the same integrity that's defined his entire life." Thomas hugged his daughter tight, whispering thank you against her hair, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. His first day at Sterling Tech was both terrifying and exhilarating. The building was sleek and modern, all glass and steel, and when he walked into the lobby in his new business casual clothes, he felt like an imposter. But Catherine met him personally, introducing him around with genuine pride, and Jennifer Hartley, the woman who'd stood up to Richard in the parking lot, greeted him with a warm smile and a promise to help him navigate the corporate waters. The automotive division was small but ambitious, and Thomas quickly understood why Catherine had sought him out. The engineers were brilliant but disconnected from the reality of how people actually used and maintained their vehicles. Thomas became the bridge, translating technical specifications into practical applications, pushing back when designs sacrificed reliability for innovation. He thought of Marcus and Mrs. Patterson and all his other customers when he reviewed product plans. Would this feature actually help someone? Would it create more problems than it solved? Could the average person afford to maintain it? His questions weren't always popular, but they were respected, and slowly the team began to shift their perspective. 3 months into his new position, Thomas was invited to present at a company-wide meeting about the automotive division's progress. The conference room was packed with executives and department heads, and Thomas felt his old nervousness creeping in as he stood to speak. He talked about integrity in design, about building products that serve people rather than just pursuing profit. He talked about the importance of understanding your customer, not just as a market segment, but as a human being with real needs and real limitations. He talked about dignity and respect and the responsibility that came with asking people to trust you with something as essential as their vehicle. As he spoke, he noticed Richard Sterling in the back of the room. Catherine's son sat with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Thomas half expected another confrontation, But when the presentation ended and people began to applaud, Richard was the first to stand. Not to leave, but to join the applause. After the meeting, Richard approached him. Thomas braced himself, unsure what to expect. "Mr. Morrison," Richard said, and his voice was different from that day in the parking lot, quieter, less certain. "I owe you an apology. A real one, not the corporate kind. The way I treated you and that other man, Marcus, was inexcusable. I was arrogant and cruel, and I'm ashamed of it." Thomas studied the younger man.